Thanks, Sue. Okay, so everybody with tuberous sclerosis or with a family member affected by tuberous sclerosis has a unique story, and this is my story. So I lived most of my life not knowing that I had tuberous sclerosis. I was diagnosed with TS at the age of 26, and I consider myself to be very mildly affected. As I said, for most of my life I didn't know anything about tuberous sclerosis, and when I was around the age of 5, these facial angiofibromas appeared, and at the time, I don't remember, but the story that I always told people was, at the time I had this skin disease called impetigo, and they're scars left behind. So I may or may not have had impetigo, but that was what I always believed, and if ever anybody asked me what they were, that's what I always told them. So, oops, sorry, I've gone too far. Help. Help.
From the beginning.
Okay.
There we go. Go for it.
All right. Okay, so this is a picture of me around about the age of 5 and wearing my favourite hairstyle. And if you look closely, you can see a few facial angiofibromas that appeared sometime around about that age. And so, as I said, I went through most of my life not knowing anything about tuberous sclerosis. When I was about 15 or so, another sort of mark appeared on my forehead, and at the time it was covered with hair, so I don't even remember it appearing, but just sometime around the age of 15 I was aware that it was there. When I was about 17 I sort of started shaving, and every time I shaved I would bleed, and so as soon as I left school and started working, I stopped shaving and haven't shaved my face ever since. That's one advantage of being a male. So life went along, and I guess I came from a family, normal sort of family. So this is my family, my 7 brothers and sisters and mum and dad. I'm the little fella there in the striped shirt. So that was when I was about the age of 7. So I just did the normal things that normal kids do, went to school, played games, had fights with my brothers and sisters, and life went along. So when I was in about my mid-20s, I knew an elderly guy who was having some treatment for skin cancer, and he suggested, well, maybe you should go along and get those things on your face checked out. And so I did what most males do, I just ignored it. And then when I was 26, I decided, well, yeah, I'm going to go and get these things checked out. And so I went to a local GP, and he sort of had a look and said, oh, I'm not really sure, it could be this or it could be that. So he referred me off to a dermatologist, a skin specialist. And so I went along, a couple of months later to this dermatologist, and I showed him the markings there on my face, and this one up here, and a few sort of little things hanging off my neck, and a mark on my back, and he sort of went, That filled me with a lot of confidence. And then he started asking, has anyone else in your family got this? Got any problems with your teeth or your eyes? And I thought, this guy knows what he's talking about. Just tell me this is not skin cancer and see you later. And then he went and got another dermatologist from the next room to come in and have a look, and she sort of said, oh, that looks like this, and that looks like that, and that looks like a shagreen patch, which means that's not that at all. So I thought, well, now 2 dermatologists don't know what they're talking about. So what he said, well, come back in another week and I'll take some biopsy samples. So a week later, he cut a little sample off there, little sample off there, and a little sample off my back, and sent them away. And so I went back a week later, and he took the stitches out, and he said, oh, can't really tell you anything yet, but it's not skin cancer, so we'll let you know. So, you know, life went on. I'm just sort of thinking, oh, just let this be over. Just tell me it's not skin cancer, and then life can go on. And, you know, there was a lot of other stuff happening in my life at the time, which was sort of, you know, on my mind, so I didn't really think too much about it. So then, you know, a few weeks later, I got a call one morning from the GP, and he said, well, we've got the results of the biopsy samples back, and you've got this condition called tuberous sclerosis, so, you know, come and see me and I'll tell you all about it. So I went and saw him a few days later, and he told me about tuberous sclerosis. Now, this GP, I assume, had probably never heard of it before in his life, but in the meantime had done a little bit of homework. And it was astonishing for me, as it is for most people, to hear about all the symptoms of tuberous sclerosis. I'll just go on to the next slide. This is a picture of me at around about the age that I was diagnosed with tuberous sclerosis at 26. So, yeah, so the doctor sort of told me, well, you know, as well as the skin, it can affect the heart, the brain, the lungs, the kidneys, the eyes, and all of these things. And it was just mind-boggling to think, you know, here I was just wanting someone to say, go away, it's nothing to worry about, and all of a sudden, life has changed. So the GP sent me off to have a whole lot of tests. He sent me off to have a CT scan, a skull X-ray, a chest X-ray, echocardiogram, and a renal ultrasound. I had all of those tests in one day. And he also said in TS fertility can be affected, so he sent me off to have a sperm count. I'm not sure what clinical guidelines he read those in, but the result of that came back normal. So all of those tests that I had in one day, so I went to this place and had all those scans done, and they put all the results with a report in one big yellow envelope and said, here you go, make an appointment with your GP and take them to him. So I took this big yellow envelope home and made an appointment with the GP, and you know, he could fit me in a Saturday morning, sort of 3 days later. So had this big envelope, took it home, sat it on the desk and looked at it every night and was just terrified, thinking, what might be in it? I didn't know. Was it going to say I had a brain tumour? Was it going to say I was going to die the next week? I had no idea. I had very little information about TS at that time. This was in the days before you couldn't just jump on the internet and find out whatever you wanted. So in the meantime, I thought, well, I'm going to find out a bit about this. So I went along to a medical library at the University of Sydney, and they had 2 books about tuberous sclerosis, so I read a lot of information. And one of them was about 3 years old, one of them was about 10 years old. And the one that was about 10 years old had a lot of the worst case scenarios, and they had some information about some case studies that had been done at the Mayo Clinic in the US. And I remember one thing in there. The average age of mortality, of death, of all the patients at that clinic was 26, and I was 26 at the time. So, you know, when you think about life, there's always 2 ways you can think about things. So, is the glass half empty? Well, I'm 26, I might die tomorrow. Is the glass half full? Every day that I live is a bonus. So I got all those scans that I sort of looked at this big yellow envelope every night, was too terrified to open it. I took them along one Saturday morning to the GP, and he opened them up, and you know, he was very, very matter of fact. He said, okay, there's no problems with your kidneys, they're fine. Okay, there's some problems there with your brain. He sort of looked at it and showed, you know, these big white splotches on a CT scan. I'd never seen one before. He said, okay, so there's some things here that will need to be looked at further. He looked at the results of the echocardiogram and said, yeah, there's a growth there in your heart and that will need to be looked at further. So he referred me off to a neurologist and a cardiologist. So I went to see a neurologist and he did some more tests, did a EEG, which was interesting, sort of hyperventilating, feel like my head was going to explode. Did some more tests and at the end he said, okay, well, you know you've got tuberous sclerosis, but it's obviously not affecting the way anything's functioning. Shook my hand and said, come back and see me if you have any problems. And it was more or less the same thing for the cardiologist. He, did a echo. I'd already had an echocardiogram. He did an ECG, and the ECG it printed out computerised results, and this was in a hospital. And again, they sort of had the results, and I was going back to see the cardiologist an hour later. So they gave me the results in an envelope, and this time I opened the envelope and had a look, and down the bottom it had printed ECG abnormal. Oh, okay, here we go. So I saw the cardiologist an hour later and he said, okay, well, asked me lots of questions. Okay, everything's fine. We know that you've got tuberous sclerosis, but it's not affecting the way anything's functioning. And I said, what's this? Marked sinus bradycardia, ECG abnormal. And he said, oh, it just means you've got a lower than normal heart rate. So see you later. And he said, come back and see me every 3 years. So I went back and saw him again 3 years later, and on another echocardiogram, they couldn't find any growth in my heart. So possibly in those 3 years, the rhabdomyoma had resolved, or he said, it might be just the resolution of a different machine. But, I've never been back to see the cardiologist or the neurologist. So I went and saw an ophthalmologist. He did some tests, and again, well, you've got this condition, but it's not affecting the way anything's functioning. So in the space of that year, I saw a whole lot of, doctors that I'd never even knew existed. In the same year, I broke my arm and had to have hand surgery. So I saw more doctors in that year than, I ever hoped to see in my life. But after that year, it was more or less, I also saw a haematologist because I was a blood donor, and they asked, can I still be a blood donor? So I was sent off to a haematologist, and they did some blood count, and I found out I had another condition called thrombocytopenia, which is a low blood platelet count. And it was very mild, so he said, well, yeah, you can still be a blood donor. And he gave me a letter saying, yeah, it's still okay for this guy to be a blood donor. And he was a professor of haematology, so I was quite proud of that letter because it said to me, well, you've got tuberous sclerosis, but things are fine, so get on with life. And that's more or less what I've done since that time. I've never had any seizures, never had any problems really that have impacted on my life. I've just been able to get on with life. When I was diagnosed with TS, I was already a teacher. Since then I've done more study in special education, psychology, and I now work as a school counsellor, which is a job that I really enjoy. So being diagnosed as an adult was a quite different experience to, I guess, the majority of people who have a child who's diagnosed with TS. So being diagnosed as an adult, I was intelligent enough to understand all of the possible complications of TS and, understand what impact it could have on my life. And, to know that, any day, I could have a seizure or something could develop. But, over a period of time, you sort of think, well, I've lived this long without any problems, so chances are pretty good that I won't have any problems, so I'm not going to worry about it too much, and life goes along. Being diagnosed that period of time was, pretty stressful, sort of, living with the uncertainty of, what all this information might say about me and might say about what was going to happen to me in the future. But it was also interesting sort of telling other people about it. It was difficult enough for me to cope with it. The last thing I wanted was friends or family to be freaking out about it. So I kind of drip-fed them information about tuberous sclerosis. I'd tell certain people a little bit of information, people who I knew better, I'd tell them more information about it. The first people I spoke to were flatmates that I was living with at the time, and sort of showed them my CT scan, and they sort of looked at some of the white splotches and sort of said, oh yeah, this is responsible for your sixth sense of humour, and this is responsible for your fashion sense. So that was helpful to know that, you know, tuberous sclerosis can be used as an excuse if you really wanted to. Telling family was, filled with a lot of trepidation because, I sort of didn't want my mum to feel, responsible in any way. So I was very, one of the first things I said, well, this is a new mutation, and, that's what the doctors had told me. And at that stage, having a genetic test in Australia wasn't sort of really on the radar. And I guess sort of, I just told, I've got 7 brothers and sisters who are all older than me. None of them had any signs of TS. Parents, grandparents, none of them had any signs of TS. So none of them were ever tested, but, mathematically it's almost certain that it was a new mutation in my case. So I just said to them, don't worry about it, it's just me. Sort of life went along, and tuberous sclerosis hadn't really sort of stopped me doing anything. It hasn't stopped me, doing things that I'm interested in, hasn't stopped me from, having a job that I like doing, hasn't stopped me from travelling lots of places around the world. I even found a mountain named after me up in northern New South Wales. That was, again, sort of, not long after I was diagnosed with TS. So for a long time after those first few years after I was diagnosed, for a long time I didn't sort of go back to any doctors. I thought, well, I know that I've got this. I won't go to any doctors unless I have any problems. I sort of know the warning signs, know what to look out for. So it was probably 10 years before I went sort of back to see another doctor. And a few years ago, I sort of started going back and having regular kidney ultrasounds, and I now have some cysts in my kidneys which are quite small, but I'm sort of having them monitored every couple of years, and so far they're not causing any problems, so we'll just sort of see how that goes. Being an adult with TS throws up sort of lots of issues in terms of the future and in terms of relationships, and sort of when you sort of meet somebody and you might sort of get interested in somebody and might want to sort of try to impress somebody, the last thing you want to tell them was, well, I've got this condition which could cause me significant health impacts, and it could cause significant issues for any child that I might have, and it's not something that you really want to tell people. But I decided, well, the only way to go is to be open, honest about that, and be upfront about that, and live with whatever consequences there are. So life has gone along for me, and as I said, I work as a school counsellor, and it's a job that I really enjoy. I work with a lot of kids, and sometimes kids will sort of say to me, oh, what are those funny things on your face? And I just say, oh, they're just spots, they don't hurt, you can't catch them, and most kids are quite happy with that explanation. Sometimes teenagers, sort of if they want to have a go a bit, say, oh, what are those funny things on your face? I say, oh, they're just facial angiofibromas. What's that? Oh, they're symptoms of tuberous sclerosis. What? Oh, it's an autosomal dominant genetic disorder. They normally give up after that. So life goes on for me. Most days I don't really even think too much about tuberous sclerosis, but I guess it always sits there in the back of my mind. It's that uncertainty of, one day, some more serious symptom could develop, but don't spend too much time worrying about it because, as I said, I've lived this long without problems and I just get on with life. And 3 weeks ago, I got married to Cherie, and that starts a new chapter in my life. Okay, thank you.